The scientific revolution starts now.
This is the Science Podcast.
Let us see in the dark.
You want my top 5?
Yes.
I don't know if I can get to 5.
But your
But
top 3, 2, 1.
top observations of Southern Oregon.
Yes.
I gotta say, I love the right turn lane situation, and I took some time this morning to actually look up the traffic rules for Oregon and their policy on right turn with the red arrow. And to contrast, I also looked up the rules in California, which is where I'm coming from. And in California, if the red arrow is red, you cannot make the right turn. But in Oregon, if it's a red arrow, it just means you have to stop before you turn. And then they caveat that with different signs: no turn on red, or don't have to stop, period.
Those are crazy, yeah.
Those are the best ones. And the traffic flow is phenomenal on right turns out here in Oregon, and I love it.
But I don't understand, why not just have a red light there? Because that's what a red light means.
Because there are certain times when they specifically want right turns to go. Like when the cross traffic lane's doing a left pocket, the right turn can turn at the same time, and you can clear out that lane. So they want to give you the maximum number of options, which is phenomenal.
Yeah, I think New York also has the right turn on red thing.
New
It's
York
only
has no
California.
rules.
New York's just do whatever. We don't have time to police this shit.
Just don't hit anyone.
It was incredible because I broke my leg during grad school and I got a parking permit in return for coming into lab because I couldn't take the subway. I was on crutches. It was winter. Every time you put the crutches down, they would just slip out from under you. It was terrifying. And it's rush hour, so there's just thousands of people who are angry at you for being in the way. And so I was like, okay, I'll come into lab, but I need a parking permit. And so I drove through Manhattan during rush hour for 3 weeks. And it was incredible because it was kind of like a video game. You would find a car, preferably a taxi, and then you would just follow the car all the way through because the taxis are never banged up. They're always insane drivers,
smart.
But they're never twisted. I've never seen a taxi.
City drivers in general are really talented drivers, right? They really know how to bob and weave. But you get out here in the country and it's sometimes you run into people, it feels like they've never seen the pavement before or something.
Man, when I lived in the city, it was like I had it down, and it wasn't until I moved out of the city that when I go back, I realize how wussy I am now. And but having a sense of the bicyclists, pedestrians, delivery drivers, and predicting everything that's happening and bobbing and weaving in lanes and positioning yourself to avoid danger is a whole, you have a 360 awareness of what's going around you. And you come out here and people just, I don't even know if they're going to stop sometimes at these stop sites. They're
I'd
coming
absolutely
in hot.
expect they won't, yeah.
And I'm and then there's people who drive extremely slow and are going 20 miles under the speed limit, and there's cars just bobbing and weaving back there trying to figure out what to do next. But
I'm always guilty of that right before the turn to our house. It's just all these people just getting so angry. I had 2 honkers yesterday when I was trying to turn into our house. Sorry, I got to turn in this thing.
I mean, people are in a hurry. It's always the case when we were out in Montana or something. Everything's 3 hours away, and so people just bomb those roads. And it's kind of the same thing out here. If you live 40 minutes outside of town.
So you got to test out those huge engines somewhere.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true.
Man, I'm in debt over my head for this engine right now.
Yeah, it's kind of incredible because you live out here and you look at all the toys that people have and you kind of take a glance also at the economic situation. And I always wonder what the average load of debt is for a working household out here. Because something like 80% of Americans are in debt. I think the average is $30,000 of credit card debt.
I mean, if you consider mortgages, it's pretty much everybody. There's very few landed people, right?
Okay, so why do I have an inherently noble vision of mortgage debt and an inherently I want to say problematic vision of like car debt.
I think the difference is a home appreciates and a car depreciates.
Mm.
So, a home is going to go up in value, and it's like a savings account. Once you pay the interest, right? Your equity is like a savings, and then you can borrow against your house as well.
Did you understand Hudson's argument for why mortgages were also piracy?
Did he say that?
He was like, yeah, he was like, even if you treat it like the person is renting the house from themselves, if they're paying a mortgage, even if there's like 0% interest and so forth, there's still money changers in the way that are.
No, his point was he was like, you shouldn't be able to include the rising cost of the house in GDP. He's like, even if you own the house and you're living on the land, like it's not fair to treat the appreciation of your property as being something that contributes to GDP because it's not a real contribution in the sense of a productive good that has been made. And because real estate always rises, is his point, which I think is only true as long as populations stay stable or grow, right? Because if the population crashes, real estate doesn't hold.
Or immigration, right? If people want to come here.
But I'm not saying birth rate. I'm just saying population. And
gotcha.
so if your population starts to decline, then all of a sudden home value, it doesn't matter if you're close to the subway or you're living on the beach or whatever. There's just more empty houses than...
That's happening in Tokyo because their birth rates are so low. There's a lot of country homes or suburb homes that are on the market and nobody's buying them. So I've seen some foreigners in Japan buy them and convert them to more of like a Western style home with like, higher countertops and just different, totally different from the standard out there. But seems like a great opportunity.
Well, there's places, have you heard about this in Italy? They're selling houses for like $10, $50.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, you can buy. I mean, I don't know if they're all sold out, but it's basically all these towns in Italy that have just emptied out.
The county owns the houses and they're trying to like entice people back or something like that.
I think nobody owns. I mean, maybe the state or the locality owns it in some way, but it was somebody's house. They're almost all in kind of some state of disrepair. Villages where the person who lived there died and nobody came to pick it up and the family doesn't care about it. And so then what do? The town dies eventually. Like you see this in the US. You drive around all these little towns where there's nothing to do. There's no industry, there's no agriculture. And so they eventually all have to empty out.
Or they become super hip. It's like the artist communities could move in or something. This is kind of happening. Like Ohio is littered with these towns. They got beautiful storefronts, really old architecture built by well-paid people a long time ago. And the bones are really solid. But, the steel mills left or whatever.
Yeah.
And so they're kind of ripe for the picking in some sense.
In some sense, but it's like you live pretty rural and we do too. And so you know how maybe just how limited that small space is. There's a couple places that you know to go. There's a couple things happening, but it doesn't have the kind of flow that a big city does. And people that are artists tend to want that flow because that's where ideas come from, right? Cross-pollination. You go listen to something here.
Bolinas is close enough to the city that they can get that pollination, I assume. Like, you guys go to the city all the time.
I mean, how do the local population, they were, in Bolinas was loggers and fishermen. And so, when that work started drying up, like logging was probably one of the first things, a lot of people went into fishing. And then now, this year they canceled salmon season altogether. So all our fishermen had to look for other fish to catch and sell. So it's been a tragedy on that front, not having salmon this year. But outside of those kind of industries, there's also farming and ranching, but that's not enough industry to sustain the whole community, right? So a lot of us out there work remotely or commute to the city or commute,
I would actually
inland, right?
I would predict that a lot of these ring towns like Bolinas and places that are like just outside of the city will be kind of booming in the next 10 years.
Oh,
because nobody's going to want to be in these crime-ridden neighborhoods and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, there's a part of me that's like, San Francisco is always going to be a hub city and actually the prices of homes have gone down in the last couple of years because of the crime and the drugs and all that junk. And if you wanted to, it's like get in now, right? And in 10 years from now, the city will revitalize itself and become the hub again, and there'll be a new boom that takes place there. So there's an opportunity to like get your foot in the door, but
I mean, hopefully that happens. It could just become like a crater-shaped city.
yeah, it could be underwater soon too.
Actually, the town I grew up in, Columbus, Ohio, total crater-shaped city. Like they built a ring road around it, and the downtown died over the course of my lifetime.
Yeah.
And it's just empty, like empty
Yeah.
office buildings, empty skyscrapers, empty house, like just nothing. I don't know. I haven't been there in like 5 years, but it's a crater-shaped city basically.
Yeah, downtown San Francisco, there's so many vacant offices, and everyone's asking like, why do we need these offices? What are they ever going to be fully occupied again? And so the next question is, of course, well, what can we do differently with these buildings, right? And I think we talked about this the first time I got on, is like, how can we revitalize these huge buildings? And so there's been a lot of talk. Well, maybe you can have like low income housing there, right? Unfortunately, the way that building codes are set up for residential properties, you got to have a certain amount of daylight in bedrooms, and you need ventilation for bathrooms, and there's
San
a lot more.
Francisco's never had daylight before.
Oh yeah. But if you take an office floor plan, right, and you want to insert a bunch of residential units in there, there's no easy way to get the light requirements covered. So like that's one step of like the process. The second issue is just with all the mechanical, electrical, plumbing issues, like to wire up a new house, you got to bring plumbing in. So you're cutting holes in floors to bring pipes out. And so you have all these different demands there. Typically you have too many elevators in a commercial building. You're moving more people up and down. So there's too much elevator. So you can imagine it's a lot of work to convert a commercial space into a viable, up to code residential space without doing a lot of changes.
And who do those costs fall on too is the question, I guess. It's like
the developer, right? And so the other big one is you got to have windows that can open, right? How do you open a commercial buildings? No way. They don't let you open the window.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So you're basically have to dismantle the whole building. You got to take the facade off. You have to gut the interior. You have to create new pathways for all your mechanical, electrical, plumbing chases that feed into each unit. And
this reminds me of something I've been meaning to ask you. How long are these things supposed to last for in general, like a skyscraper?
A lot of projects will set, like for infrastructure around town, right, roads and bridges. Usually we look at it like a 30-year design horizon. But for a building, a skyscraper, maybe they're looking at 50 or 70 years structurally, I don't think there's any, as long as you're maintaining a structure, the bones, like the steel and the concrete, and you're maintaining it.
And can you know whether you are maintaining it? Like, can you see if it's rusting?
Yeah, you have inspection, fireproofing.
But like down in the concrete pillars, isn't that where all the steel frames are and stuff?
Yeah, the foundation, you got to look at it. If you can't see it, yeah, there could be problems that you're not dealing with.
Did I get that right though, that you said that the lifetime of a bridge is 30 to 50 years?
It depends. Like certain bridges, like the Golden Gate Bridge or Bay Bridge, are like, those were designed for 100-year lifespan, right? But we've figured out ways to maintain stuff and extend their life, and that's really, I think when the Highway Act went in, they designed a lot of stuff for 50 years. Like a lot of the highway bridges were 50-year structures, right? And so then they come in and they add a lane, and they add 2 lanes, and then you got 3 different bridges all side by side. One of them's 50 years old, one of them's 20 years old, and one of them's 10 years old, and they're all side by side. How do you replace the 50-year bridge and keep 6-7 lanes of traffic moving?
They just took down one, right? They built a completely new bridge next to it and then put up a new Bay Bridge.
Yeah.
It seems like that's going to have to be the way forward.
The sequencing of how do you you have to build a temporary structure adjacent to the proposed new structure, right? You have to transition traffic onto this temporary structure so you can dismantle the old structure and make room for the new structure. And with the Bay Bridge, they were building the bridge decks and stuff adjacent to it, and they literally slid it into place.
Oh, really?
From the side. So they built a whole support system, built the deck, and then over a weekend, they dismantle the temporary one, get it out of the way, and then slide the new one in. And
What do you slide it with? Cranes?
Giant rollers and hydraulic rams. And, I'm not an expert in this by any means, but I'm sure you can find a YouTube video on how they do this, right? I love YouTube University, right?
I mean, it was dope seeing it go up. Just watching the little piece. Every time we'd go down and visit, it'd be like a little further, a little further, a little further.
The funny thing is that span, at least on the Oakland side of the Bay Bridge, it was totally unnecessary to meet the requirements. I mean, there's not a lot. I don't know if there's any real ship traffic on the Oakland side of the Bay Bridge, but
I think so. Isn't
Oakland
the Port of
wanted.
Oakland right there?
What's that?
Isn't the Port of Oakland literally right there?
Yeah, but it's to the south of the bridge, so there's no need to bring cargo ships around that area. But they don't need that that big center span. But the city of Oakland wanted to have a signature span that they could point out with pride and say, And as a matter of fact, it was on the Golden State Warriors jersey, the new bridge.
Save the logo.
Yeah, it was part of the logo. I'm actually fortunate to know one of the engineers who designed the actual cable of that bridge, and it's a single cable that sort of like rubber bands the whole thing together.
And you said he was like the most like high test intellect in the firm or something.
There's a lot of PhD bridge guys that I get to work with, and they're really sharp guys. And looking at just that bundle of wires, right? It's little wires bundled into bigger sort of strands, and then those all get compressed down into a big, large diameter.
I mean, this
right?
is probably a stupid question, but what's the mechanics of that? Like, why use smaller threads as opposed to just one big piece of steel?
That's a great question, and I'm sure there's been some studies done to find what the optimal strand is, but
it might be just redundancy or something.
Well, the way I understand, like at least with the Golden Gate Bridge, they had like a support wire between the towers and its anchorage, and then they ran a little trolley with a spool, and so they would basically unspool the wires and do passes, and then once they did a certain number of wires, they probably bundled them, right? And then kept going and just kept spooling wires together.
So it might be like
and then clamping them down, and then once they had the full bundle, then they basically wrapped the whole bundle together.
Well, you see this in biology too all the time, right? The way that the cells are organized, the way that the different actin filaments, and there's substructure. What am I thinking of? I'm thinking of myofibrils in muscle, actually. So they're called. Probably fucking this up, but they're organized in a similar way where there's concentric windings. I wish I could. I don't have a computer with me.
I mean, I think that my instinct is it's a bending thing and a manufacturing thing. Okay, so think about how difficult it would be to put an entire single piece of steel that thick to hold the bridge. Transport manufacturing seems really difficult, but it seems easier to manufacture something that's woven and wound. And then if you take
but even guitar strings are like this. Like most load-bearing wires are multi-layer.
Yeah, actually, a guitar string is a great example of what the bridge cables are like, because you have a core wire, and then you have a wrapping going around it. So yeah, what's crazy. The other thing too is that once the wire reaches the end of its run, you have to terminate it, right? So, and there's an incredible amount of tension in that wire, right? That you're basically converting all that gravity load on a suspension bridge, and you're converting it into a tensile load, right? And so the wire is carrying all this tensile load, and you need to anchor all that tension into a gravity block, right?
What's a gravity block? That sounds.
It's awesome. Just a heavy ass block.
Okay.
of concrete, and it's anchored into the ground. It's on a really strong foundation, and you anchor each wire individually into that block to get it into the ground, right? And so each wire has to have a termination point. So if you have 1,000 wires, and I don't even know how many wires, but I think very in the hundreds, if not thousands of wires, each one has to anchor itself into a block. And there are deflection limits on as far as like, if the main strands come in one place, and you have this large area of a block and you need to distribute wires into it, right? If those wires deflect too much at the exit point from the main cable, then you're going to have a buildup of stresses, and you're going to have a weak point. The other crazy thing about these bridges is that you have to deal with moisture, right? And rust is like the biggest enemy. And then put a bridge over salt water. Salt water is super corrosive, right? So they actually have to have a ventilation system that basically a dehumidifying system that sucks all the moisture out of the main cables to keep them dry. I can't remember. I think there was a bridge, maybe it was in Italy or somewhere, where that was a factor in its collapse. The cables had rust in them, and it's out of sight, out of mind, right?
Exactly, yeah.
It's hard to inspect that stuff.
That's what worries me about the interior of the skyscrapers too.
Yeah. There are ways of non-destructive testing, right? You can do, gosh, I don't even know the names of this stuff, but you can scan the steel and look for dislocations in the lattice, and you can look for weak points without having to, do any destruction to it.
It strikes me that we have this perception of modern man that we don't really build monuments the way that people used to.
That's exactly what I was thinking about too. I was like,
but like a tunnel through some massive rock mountain or a bridge over the bay. These are all massive monuments that I think people kind of take for granted because there's not a sense of just how much careful engineering and processing goes into it. And I think it's a reflection of how our society has shifted from looking at art as the thing that is the most important thing to engineering as being the most important thing. Because the old cathedrals are engineered to roughly the same. They had a design of what the cathedral looked like, and they didn't really iterate that much. What they iterated on was the way that they decorated them. And here, I think it's a little bit different because people iterate on designs. Like it's an engineering marvel.
These aren't big pieces of rock that are going to last 10,000 years. Is the other thing.
Tunnels will last for a long time.
The tunnels?
I think so. No?
Well, I don't know.
Interesting. You think?
Well, I wonder too. I mean, if we're building with steel, like how long would steel last? Like, if you left a steel tower unattended for 100 years, right? Nature would move in, right? You'd have plants growing. Animals would maybe start nesting in these towers. Glass breaks out, and the elements are let in. Like, how long would the steel structure last? Like, how long does steel
not very long
last?
Like,
wouldn't it just rust into oblivion?
Yeah, because like
how long would that take?
I imagine a really, really cool art installation where you put in pillars of different materials and you just leave them for hundreds and thousands of years and just see how nature takes them.
Well, Fat Dog's Ranch is essentially this project.
The longest science experiment ever.
I think that's
right?
the tar drop experiment. They have.
Oh, the tar drop?
Yeah, do you know that one?
Yeah, I've heard about the tar drop. I also heard about a recent one where they had this refrigerator that was keeping the specimens at a certain negative, like super cold temperature.
Wait, hold on. What's the tar drop?
Okay, well, we can go back to let's hear about tar drop first.
Tar drop is just it's an experiment for the viscosity of tar, and so it's this big vessel that has pitch inside of it, and it's been slowly dripping for like 200 years at this point.
Why do you need 200 years worth?
Because tar is really viscous.
I see.
This has got to be the best data on that pitch ever devised.
What was the thing about the fridge?
Oh, someone had some specimens, and they were at a very cold temperature. And what happened was the refrigerator had a fault, and it was sounding an alarm. And one of the staff in the research center unplugged it because he's tired of hearing the alarm, and just like unplugged the machine so it would stop making this alarm. And it basically ruined all the specimens. It was a 20-year. They were 20 years, I think, into the experiment, and all that research lost. And they said it was $1 million down the drain, basically.
Look,
But
if you have $1 million worth of stuff in a freezer, you should probably deal with it when it's alarming.
it's funny. It makes me think of those people who want to like cryogenically freeze their bodies, and the freezer, some new maintenance guy comes into the and unplugs something or presses the wrong button and like thaws out all the specimens. Like, oops.
I think Walt Disney's got his head frozen somewhere.
Is that true?
I think so.
Yeah.
I don't have a computer here today to fact check anything.
Where is
But I wanted to say, like, about the steel thing. We had this dude on the show who was like, consider the different ages, like the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, and the Iron Age. And he was like, if you look, the time before present for each one of those materials is exactly what we would expect for their decay length, essentially. So he's like, you don't really know whether someone 10,000 years ago had bronze tools because they wouldn't exist anymore. And I don't know if it's like entirely defensible, but it's an interesting concept.
Well, I guess the only way to preserve steel for a really long time would be to keep it extremely dry. Right. So,
but if
someone did have
people aren't
steel,
taking care of them for 100 years,
yeah,
what's going to happen?
Places that we think are really dry now, maybe they were not dry at the time that they were using the steel, right? Climate's changed. Anyhow, not really sure. Yeah, I mean, going back to this idea of like, what would downtown San Francisco look like if it was abandoned, and like 100 years from now, what would it look like? What would still be? Maybe some of the concrete would still be up, right? We have concrete. There's steel inside of the concrete, and the concrete provides like a jacket around it, right? And it fails when we get excessive cracking, which becomes an entry point for water. And that's when you run into problems. But
with those huge earthquakes every 100 years or so, it's like, think about the Twin Towers, just a pile of rubble at the bottom, right? Like, I imagine that's like that pile of rubble.
You're gonna bring Twin Towers into this,
we could do it.
Like if my colleagues find this on YouTube and find this interview and I say something,
I find it really like comforting to like just like figure, like, because the thing is, you have to be able to stand behind the things you say, but like you should kind of be like that anyways, right? Like, I don't want to say stuff that I wouldn't want people, like, I don't want to say things that I don't really believe in, but if I believe in them, then and it's cool. Like, if you don't know something, we can look it up too. But it's like, there's nothing to hide about yourself. Like, you're an awesome person, and so
it's if we're gonna get technical, and that's when I'm like, got to stay inside my lane. I have a
or we can look it up too.
But the suspension bridge, I'm pretty sure I know what I'm talking about on that one.
Hopefully somebody does at least.
Yeah. But it is an interesting question, though, because I really do wonder, like, what... And, I think History Channel did something, like, where they showed, like, what would cities look like in the event of the apocalypse, right? Like, there's, like, all fear, and they show lions, like, jumping between, like, high-rises and, like, killing shit,
Should I start a new audio?
No way.
We had to stop. Oh, it's just
no, we didn't.
You didn't stop
No, nothing stopped.
Okay. I just looked it up, by the way. It looks like steel-framed buildings are expected to last 100 years.
100 years?
Which is
That's
like
good.
Nothing, though. Like, think of those Roman buildings where they're
look at the Empire State Building's been around, right?
But will it be in another 100 years?
I don't know. Are we recording?
Yeah, I didn't stop recording. So
Okay.
about I wanted to say something though, because it's like there's stuff that I think is hard to say because it is outside the Overton window. I think there's things that are just not, like, especially in a professional context. I totally understand that there's some stuff that you don't want to say because it has consequences reputationally and socially, and it just, we live in a society where you can't say everything that you want to say.
But as long as everybody feels that way, then we're kind of screwed as a culture. Like, I was actually I was really scared when we started this that it was going to prevent me from, teaching at a university or something, that I was, questioning fundamental dogmas like the Big Bang and shit like that. But the lady who hired me listened to our podcast and she was like, "Oh, this is really interesting. Like, I think that we should explore all the possible." And I was like, I was fucking shocked, dude. Like, I couldn't believe I got that job. I could not believe it. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. But it really opened up my mind to just being like, dude, like, just be real. Like, just be honest. If you're questioning something, it's okay to question things. That doesn't mean that what you think is right either. It's just like, I have questions about things.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny you say that because, well, it's not funny. It's very true. I've worked with a lot of engineers, and when we get on the subject of 9/11, I've had people just outright not question the official story. Hey, this is, yeah, the official report is correct, and it was these bad terrorist people that did all this. And then I meet engineers who say, well, um, Doug, I'd love to talk to you about that, but we can't do it here. We got to go, maybe over a beer after work. They don't even want to open their mouths about it around their colleagues, probably for the fear of the retribution, or just being labeled as a lunatic, right? So I'm pretty vocal about it, but um, there's 2 planes, 3 towers, right? World Trade Center 7 is so far, I think, one of the only steel frame buildings that's collapsed due to fire.
Yeah.
There's been no other recorded cases, and they had some floors that had a prolonged fire. I think the water got shut off, and the sprinkler system wasn't running, so it was kind of this like low heat, slow burning fire that just kept going. And apparently it caused the building to free fall collapse. So
I mean, I think a good place to start with that is just being like, wait a second, we invaded Iraq after this. Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm like, I just want to start there and work backwards and be like, wait a second.
well, yeah,
So a bunch of Saudi terrorists attack our tower, and we remain best buddies with Saudi Arabia, but we attack Iraq. It's just start
Yeah.
there. That's absolutely grounded fact.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know what the hell went down on that day, but it was the pretense for sure for something that made no fucking sense whatsoever.
Absolutely. And I look at this 2 ways. Is one is, yes, maybe there were people who had this plan conceived and orchestrated this thing, right, with the intention of that. There's also people that just see the opportunity and they go, hey, this terrible terrorist attack happened, and all these Americans died, and Americans are pissed about it. We need to do something. What can we do? And that's when they go, oh well, hey, we don't like Saddam. Like, let's just go take care of Saddam, and we'll blame it all on him. And then that like checks off a box of list of things to do or objectives that the country has, and we want the oil, whatever. So
if it was just that, though, that it would maybe be less of a suspicious situation. But there's a lot of bizarre stuff that happened that day. With the squadrons flying the simulated.
Yeah, they're doing a training mission, and they were unarmed.
Yeah,
right? They didn't have ordnance on board for the training exercise.
To pull the building comments from the broadcaster guy. Who was that? The owner of the tower was on like CNN or something.
There's so many alignments that where certain individuals were like highly benefited, right? The owner took out that insurance policy like what, that year, like leading up to it. Like what's the,
I just think we have to normalize the asking of questions if things don't make sense. It's like, I don't think like you should be out there prophesizing that this or that necessarily occurred, even when it comes to stuff like COVID or climate change or all these things. But we have to be able to ask questions. Like, we need to be able to be curious and at least discuss like what's going on. If there's a good answer, great. I want to hear it. You know what I'm saying? But I don't think like that. I think it's a scary situation when a society gets to the point that you can't ask questions anymore. That's when really gruesome stuff starts to unwind.
Yeah, early on, I think in the investigation, FEMA did a report that said they had evidence of explosives. And they had an early report that explained that, and then it just didn't get rolled up into the official explanation, right? But FEMA went through the trouble of producing that report, and people people don't willingly sit down. I mean, I hate writing reports. Like, why would I be like, hey, I'm gonna scheme writing this report, and I'm gonna totally make everything up because I have an agenda, and I wanna make my agenda happen. And so I'm gonna write. That's a lot of effort. And the people who work at FEMA, I don't think they're so early on. What would their motivation be to like?
They're all like
We're gonna
dissociated bureaucrats, right? Like they're just gonna do their little part or whatever.
They're gonna do their job. They're gonna do their role in the best manner they know how to do. And they want to keep their bosses happy. But like, why would they make that up, right? I don't know.
I don't know either.
Maybe they were told to put that in the report by their supervisor. But anyways,
it's weird because
you don't know.
We're getting to the point though that this was a very real event in our lives, but I feel like kids who are growing up now, like your kids, it's just gonna be this monolithic story of what happened, and it's in a history book now, and it's just a done deal, right?
We're getting older.
Everybody's getting older.
Yeah, some of my colleagues, I talked to them about it. They're like, dude, I don't even remember that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was like in kindergarten or something, right? And you're like, what? You don't remember 9/11? Like, oh man, that was crazy.
I'm kind of like worried that's going to happen with this whole COVID disaster too.
Absolutely.
We just kind of
20
move
years from now
on and forget, and then the next generation's got to suffer the same disaster.
I don't know. I think the hardest part about exercising and being willing to ask questions is if you're willing to accept the answers you get. And I think the hardest part for me with 9/11 was that after asking all the questions, I came to my own belief that was kind of disturbing for me, and I had to accept. I had to accept that. I had to accept the possibility that there's a deep corruption, and there's. I had to accept that we're being lied to, or I had to accept that our government conceals the truth from us. I had to early on accept that you can't trust official narratives, right? And that's a hard pill to swallow. And I think that prevents a lot of people from acknowledging it's like, hey, America's the greatest country, and I don't want to hear anything that takes, that disputes that fact. Like, America's the best.
I think they just mean America's a really comfortable country.
Yeah.
I think that's what they mean. And like, I get it for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, Nastia and I remember Nastia being like, if you really think that, how can you possibly do anything with your life except for rage against that machine and try to find a way to, supplant it?
I mean, what else could you possibly do? That's kind of always my thing with this. I'm like, if you really do think that the society is broken to the degree that the government is actively lying to you, to the point that 9/11 wasn't what the official narratives say that it was, and 2,500 people died for something that wasn't actually the case, how could you do anything except for fight against that with every fiber of your being and give your life to it? Because that's what people do when they see a reality that is completely orthogonal to what you're being told. Like, you look at the Soviet Union, and that was what people did, is that they committed themselves to breaking the hold of this toxic ideology. And of course, nothing happens in a vacuum because...
But dude, 2,500 people is nothing compared to the, like 40, 50,000 people. Was it Pfizer or Merck? One of those big giants killed with the Vioxx scandal? Like, killing people is the cost of business to these folks. And if that was going to result in like enormous profits for these financial arms, I just...
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying, which is like that, okay, so you have a couple of responsibilities here. The first is to make sure that everything that you say is dead correct.
Right. That's very, very difficult to do because the facts are scattered.
That's true, but things come out over time, right? Like the Merck Vioxx scandal, that came out over time. There were court cases, they were subpoenaed.
When was the Merck's... I've never heard of this.
Okay, so hold on. Let me look up the details so I don't misrepresent it.
I mean, basically, Merck knew that Vioxx was killing people. And there was internal emails between them suggesting that this was the case. And the response from the top dogs was fuck it, this is essentially something that even if we get fined for, it's just not a big deal.
Yeah.
And they killed like a stadium full of people.
Wow.
And, they're still killing it in the market, right? Like
Wow.
they're fine. They don't give a shit at all.
When did this happen?
I think it was early 2000s maybe.
By 2006, there were 10,000
Wow.
cases against Merck and 190 class actions.
Oh my God. You know what's crazy is I've never heard about this.
Really?
And I mean,
I had a friend who was
it's just not in my area of interest, but
baseball player. I was roommates with baseball players in college, and there was a couple of them that were on Vioxx when it came out.
Wait, in college?
Yeah, because their freaking baseball players are always just like
Yeah.
destroying their shoulders and stuff. I knew one pitcher, shout out Adam Selhorst, who was on the Vioxx in college.
So is it a pain med? What is it?
It's like it's basically ibuprofen, but it's
Uh-huh.
a really toxic ibuprofen. It's
Wow.
like some sort of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, if I'm not mistaken. But it turned out to give these cardiac events.
So
Wow.
basically, 88,000 people just in the US alone had heart attacks from Vioxx, and 40,000 of them died.
So if if the top brass of a very prominent corporation in America would kill 40,000 people,
Yeah.
what the hell makes you think
technically.
that somebody else wouldn't kill 2,500 or however many people died on that day?
I think it's it in the case of the medical thing, that's collateral damage. Like I don't think there was ever an intent to kill anyone.
Well, no,
right?
so
That
what
wasn't the
they
intention.
knew,
They
they
knew
knew that
that.
it was causing heart attacks,
and
they
so they
maintained it on the market. And so
that's a little different.
right, because so it's not a case where it's premeditated murder where they're like, we want to kill these people. It's more, like you say, collateral damage because they know that it's going to damage their ability to market the drug. And instead of taking it off the market, opening themselves up to lawsuits, they cover it up because if you can't prove liability.
Well, they didn't even take it off the market, is the thing. They knew they were it's not any different than knocking down a building full of 2,000 people or whatever.
Yeah.
It's not any different because once you know that there's people dying and you don't do anything about it because you're making money, it's this exact same thing. I mean, come on. Like if you allow somebody to die when you could save them, you're still going to jail for that.
Or you should.
I think you do. It's different, right?
I always wonder, like if you work at Merck and you're passionate about creating new medicines or new treatments, right? And you're really like you have a strong belief and passion for the work you're doing. Like that just seems like a difficult situation to be in, and it's like you have a whole company and like colleagues, like if you're in a leadership and you and your colleagues have built up this amazing research team or group, like a community, right? There's really a community inside companies of good people. There are communities of good people inside these corporations that are well intentioned and mean to do right and have everything to lose from this stuff. So where do they go wrong? And I think it's this self-preservation, right? It's like, well, imagine the first researcher at the company who's like, hey, by the way, I think this is going to increase heart attacks, like, and having the nerve to come forward. If your whole company goes in on or heavily invests in an idea and there's a major flaw with that idea and you basically pull the plug, that might be the end, right? And nobody really wants to pull the plug, right? So they're going to stick with the program and kind of head in the sand, let's keep things moving. And I think that's the justification. And really, we need more brave people to step up and come forward. We need more whistleblowers who are convicted.
I just think like a culture of being able to ask questions, right? Like this is something we really struggle with on this show too, is like how to just talk about things that might not be true, but they might be true, right? How to very like create a culture where it's okay to be like, yeah, I'm kind of thinking maybe there could be cardiac events here. And somebody else be like, yeah, maybe there could be. But like not to have somebody just be like, there's cardiac events, we need to shut down the assembly lines, right? It's like there's a very tactful way, I think, to address concerns and a culture of curiosity. And
You can't really mix a culture of curiosity with a culture of profits, though. Merck made $25 billion the year before they pulled it. They were fined in total, so that's a single year of profits off of a drug that they were fined, I think, a couple billion, maybe. And so,
It's cost benefit analysis.
right? So,
It's a simple decision for them.
it's the
Right.
same thing with the opioid epidemic, right?
like
Right.
somebody's like, hey, this is kind of screwed up, and everybody's who's making the decisions about the bottom line and about what the board has to do, what they have to provide to shareholders, their own benefits packages. There's no possible space in which it is kind and gentle, idle curiosity that allows these things to change. There's too much entrenchment in too many systems for it to be an option to just politely be like, hey, this might not be a great idea. Maybe if you were able to come up with a drug that had the same exact effects, but didn't have any physical repercussions, side effects wise, then you could convince them to shift. Because we've talked about this before too. It's like, okay,
It's
so
like building the Bay Bridge next to the Bay Bridge.
well, something is screwed up and you know that it's screwed up. And the only way that you're really going to get people to change is you have to find a viable alternative that's better than what you're using right now. Because I'm thinking a lot about pesticides. And there's a huge environmentalist campaign to get rid of pesticides, which I totally get because they're super toxic to the environment. I have a feeling that a lot of the population collapses that we see aren't because of global warming or whatever. I think that it's chemical. And I mean, overfishing, obviously, but on top of that, chemical problems.
Polluted rivers and streams. Yep, affecting, and yeah, so many different.
But how can you possibly get rid of pesticides? Like the entire food supply depends on it.
Yeah, Braden made this really interesting point yesterday about how there's this, was it United Nations or some global consortium that was looking at the top threats to civilization in the future. And climate change is only 1 out of 9. A lot of them were things like this, like ecosystem diversity, like clean water. The roads too, I guess, give a ton of pollution from the engine, from the brakes, and from the tires. And
There's no such thing as a zero emission vehicle, period. There's always going to be off gassing or brake dust or tire, rubber, microplastic, all that stuff comes off into the environment.
But fixing those issues is just too complicated and expensive when you can just point out one easily remedied solution or one easily remedied problem. Because you can build CO2 scrubbers, you can create electric vehicles, there's a market for that. But there's not a market for fixing brakes and tires and roads and byproducts that aren't even measured from industrial processes.
Yeah, so if let's say you're interested in coming up with a new way of doing brakes, right? That it creates no particulate matter. I mean, you could do this with motors, right? And when you turn it into a generator,
aren't Teslas like that?
Yeah, you have regenerative braking, so that takes some load off of brakes. But to stop really fast, brakes are ideal, superior, right? You can't stop that fast with a motor, I would think. So, but how do you market that, right? If you're interested in this, how do you market that to the public without some sort of incentive?
Yeah.
And that's where our government, I think, needs to step in and say, hey, we need to address this.
But we have to have a government that's oriented towards something like a higher ideal of what humanity and the ecosystem could look like in the future.
But that's what's happening, and nobody likes it because that's a one world government. You and I have talked about this before, where it's like, okay, so you have a thing like brake dust, full of heavy metals, toxic stuff that you want to get rid of. And inherently, the only way that you can possibly get rid of it is by getting everybody to agree that there's going to be a new standard and that you implement that standard and you phase out the old standard. That's what California does all the time. And that people get so frustrated by it because it's like, oh man, all the cars you're going to have to buy are electric now. And everybody's like, electric cars don't solve the problem because you have grid issues and you don't have enough renewable energy. And so what you're still doing is you're still burning stuff. And it's just, you're mining cobalt with slaves in Africa. And so there's not an answer for this that can that can be agreed upon because people don't want to have to change, number one. And number two, the systems that we want to change to have serious problems because we haven't worked out these things. We're literally trying to fix the machine as we're flying in it because we're just we're on the arrow of time and we are riding it, and the best that we can do is try to improve the situation, but it requires massive governance to do that. Massive.
Well, you said one world government. Maybe that's a symptom, not a um, what's the opposite? I don't know. We don't need to.
Cause?
It's not. Yeah. It's like maybe one world government is a symptom of people waking up, and if enough people wake up to the reality of where we're headed, right? All the, again, pollution. You brought up pesticides. Like pollution is a huge threat to us. I would say more so than climate change, right? We can deal with
1000%.
a changing climate, but if we can't remove ourselves from a toxic cancer causing environment, right? Like, where do we have to go? Like we're polluting everything, everything's toxic, and we're fleeing one place to the next because of weather changes, going to more hospitable climates, but only to find out, well, that's all polluted as well, and the water's not safe to drink.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about the one world. I used to think the one world government thing was creepy, but I think it was my cousin pointed it out that there's already really strong tensions between local, state, and federal rights.
Yeah.
And if you think about a lot of the big policies too, the states kind of do what they want to some extent. And I feel like the local municipalities and like one argument for the world government is how the hell are we going to get off this planet if we don't all get together and work together and build the resources to do that? If we want to get off the planet, which it'd be nice to have. I don't want
to get off. I love our planet.
I'm down to stay here, but we should probably have like a backup hard drive.
Yeah.
I think that the reason that the one world government is creepy is because this is what happened during COVID, right?
With the WHO,
with the UN, with the WHO, with all of these moneyed because there's money being made in the implementation of these programs. Like if you think about the military-industrial complex, it was an incredibly efficient way to make money because you poured all of this government subsidy into manufacturing munitions. Those people would then sell them to other countries, make massive profits. Okay. So there's a profit incentive.
Put those countries into debt, start little fights in their neighborhood. It's the story of South America, essentially.
And so, okay, we know that happens. And then on top of that, you have the moral imperative to support these green policies. And you end up in a situation where there is a large accumulation of power that is morally justified, that has a financial interest that is not necessarily aligned with the health and well-being of people.
But that can happen at any level, right? That's not just because it's a global scale.
It's a resource question. Your local municipality probably doesn't have the ability to buy a facial recognition system that is able to evaluate on the basis of physiognomy and, whatever infrared data they can gather if you're about to commit a crime or not. Like, that's expensive. That's an expensive system to train, to implement, to run. And so your local municipality might not have that, but the one world government has that.
How did you go from there to facial recognition infrared camera systems?
Well, she's saying that's the creepy stuff that's coming, but I'm like, I'm like, how do you know that the big global structure is going to have more money than like California's going to have tons of money?
But California is California is literally at the vanguard of that global structure. The technology companies are the force that is driving the creation of the one world government. They have the profit motive. California is 100% sold to that.
Does California have all this facial recognition? Like, are they implementing it or are they outsourcing it to people? Are they what is it? Exporting it?
I saw something about this just recently.
Wow. I think the moral needle keeps moving though, right? So right now they have us in this green mode, right? Where they're like, we got to reduce our carbon footprint. And like, that's all, I think there's some good benefits to reducing carbon. It means we're going to reduce how much fossil fuels we burn. And we know fossil fuels, when we burn them, they cause toxic, chemicals, byproducts that are cancer causing,
For sure.
right? So like that's a win for pollution, but people see it as, oh, I'm reducing, my carbon footprint and I'm helping with climate change,
Right.
right? They don't I don't hear people say, hey, I'm going electric because I want to reduce the cancer-causing chemicals, byproducts that I'm creating with a combustion vehicle, right? You don't hear that. You hear it's like, I'm reducing my carbon footprint, right? I'm doing this morally good thing. But so with one world government, I think they're opportunists, and the powers that be are always looking for opportunity, but they still have to work um, within the masses. And if the masses can morally align with them, that gives them the power they need to do some of this stuff. But as we shift our moral compass, if we said, you know what, I don't care about carbon, I care about this pollution, I care about cleaning the bay, I care about having clean drinking water, with all these factories on the East Coast that just, North Carolina or something, they dump all these chemicals in the river, and all the people downstream, like the fracking wells in Pennsylvania, where whole communities drinking water is getting tainted by the fracking.
Dude,
the
even the
fracking
coast
stuff.
out here, man, it's like really gross. You see these rivers empty, and then you go upstream a bit, and there's some sort of pulp factory or something, and it smells so bad out at the coast, right where these things empty. It's like,
We've allowed this to happen. Like, and where's our moral compass on that? Are we
We've
going to
had
say
to
we don't
have
want this stuff anymore? But then it comes down to, well, hey, if I make a stink about it, my factory's going to close, or I'm going to lose my job, or our community is going to fail. So, um, it's it's
fundamentally.
it's it's difficult. I guess you only have the luxury of your moral compass as far as how well you're currently situated, right?
exactly. And
If you
I think
have
that,
the bandwidth to you know, um,
Like, this is the thing. Okay, so when we talk about crime being bad in places like San Francisco, what is that? What does that lead to? That leads to a situation where you look at something like facial recognition technology that police departments are actually right now. So there was a ban for 3 years in California on facial recognition technology. And right now, there's a bill that is trying to get passed where they're like, look, we should allow it to be used, but regulate it heavily. And the motivation is this, that if there's crime, we can implement the technology because it will help make our situation better, because it will allow us to solve crime faster, more effectively, and make life better. And so all of these things come down to the fact that there is an incentive to agree to the technological shift because it will make things better. But there are other downstream consequences that I don't think that we are really wired to wrestle with, because they might not be consequences on us directly. They're consequences maybe on our kids or even 2 generations down the
well,
road.
let's stop right there for a second and think, well, the motivation for having this technology is to catch criminals.
Mm.
That's a reflection of our own morality, in that we still have people who want to kill
yeah,
others
why
or
are we
hurt
making
others or harm
criminals?
others. Yeah, we have criminals. So potentially, um, there's a future where our morality is much higher. We're more spiritually um, enlightened to the point where we don't need to create crime, or the conditions that led to the crime, poverty, let's say, or addiction, those conditions have been taken out. Then, let's say you are operating a facial recognition program. Maybe you'll say, hey, you know what? We don't need this.
Right, right.
And it's cost money to operate. We don't need to pay for
I
this.
was gonna
We don't
say
have crime.
those
Like
those technologies create a lot of jobs, right? Like I know people that I went to school with who couldn't get jobs in the academy, and so they went and worked for these companies that do this kind of stuff because that's a real market right now. But it's easy to imagine that there's a different market that involves actually creating better children, better citizens, better people, right? Like think about the ways that you could actually put people into a good social environment. You can think of all sorts of activities. Like, what is the reason that none of us turned out as criminals? Well, it's probably because of our upbringing. Like, I was always in the woods as a kid. I was playing sports. I was doing martial arts. I was doing music, right? I was in all these programs because I was lucky enough to come from, a wealthy enough community that had the resources to make those things happen. But if
And you have
everybody,
stable parenting. I think that's probably one of the biggest factors is stable parenting. And when you have single moms, single dads, kids living with grandparents, you know, those kids are missing something, and they get into a gang, or they find family values in a gang, and the gang's out committing crime. Like,
but is there a way to
how do you
create good?
how do you address
How
that?
do you could you put the same level of economic push instead of into technologies like facial recognition and crime prevention into community structures, so that kids who you can't really control what parents do, but could you make like could you make societies for children, like I'm thinking of like boy girl scout type things, maybe not as militant, but situations where you get outside, you get to socialize, you get education from people. Like one of the coolest things about boy scouts for me was I'd get to go, maybe I take a merit badge class with a guy who works in the House of Representatives downtown or something, right? And I learn about the law, or I go and study from a real EMT and learn first aid, and you have this opportunity to really be exposed to the productive sides of existence in society. And I just wonder if there isn't an economy for that would be equally appealing. Like you can imagine spending a lot of money on this stuff.
I call that kind of going through the back door entrance, right? The front door is the wide open door. It's like the easy, politically accessible thing is like, hey, we've got crime. We need facial recognition software. And this company has a great technology and it's going to help us increase our arrests by 20%, blah, blah, blah. Let's do it. And the mayor or signs off on it. Yep, we're going for it. But then there's the back door, which is I kind of look at it as the narrow gate, right? That's the harder one to get through, but the reward is much higher. So
Like
the narrow gate, yeah, would be poverty, right? Poverty, or you know, dis broken up families, lack of community, high crime, addiction, right? We need to address that stuff, and we need to provide treatments. We need to provide support. We need to provide good diet. We need to provide healthy environments, more nature. Like whenever you look at an impoverished neighborhood, the first thing I notice, there's no trees. Every house has no lawn, no trees. It's a concrete, encapsulated world. And being in that environment, is that a good environment for kids? um you know Compared to being in Boy Scouts, spending time in nature, having a connection with earth and nature, right? My wife used to work in Oakland, and she had kids that are in kindergarten, first grade, who had never left Oakland. They had never crossed the bridge to San Francisco. They had never been to Golden Gate Bridge. They had never done any sightseeing around. The only world they knew was the concrete world they lived in. And like taking these kids on field trips to go to the Golden Gate Bridge was just, can you imagine, like eye-opening for these kids,
And it seems
right?
like that's a huge market, is I guess my point. It's like there's huge development there. It's just a matter of whether you want to develop markets to buttress yourself against the things you're afraid of, or do you want to build markets that support a better, like Braden brought this up yesterday. It seems kind of cliche, but I think it's really beautiful and really inspirational. Is, do you want to orient your decision making towards what love do you have for the beautiful future that you can imagine here? Or do you orient yourself towards the fear that you have about what could go wrong if you fuck this up?
Yeah, I love that.
These are systems that take 20 years to mature, maybe more, right? So if you imagine that you're talking about a program that starts when a baby is born and then matures when the kid graduates college or finishes whatever training program you go through, that's a 20-year investment before you begin to even see the profits from it.
For sure.
And it's just, there's nothing that can do that except for governments. There's
Yeah,
no
well,
corporation that can be like, we're going to put money into this, and the only time that we're going to see returns is when this kid graduates, but that kid's not going to graduate and then go back to work in the company that was organized in like field trips for students. They're going to go and they're going to go do something else somewhere else. And so,
well, we're never going to be able to build a government that can do anything closely approximating that as long as it's on the leash of the financial institutions. Like our government is essentially owned by the financial institutions. And so as long as, let's assume that we have a brand new government for a second, because that's the most interesting thing to me in the whole universe is like, yeah, this is all like messed up and everything, but what comes next? Like what does a really functional, beautiful government look like that works for people's long-term interests?
How about an office of compassion?
Sounds terrifyingly
sounds-
Soviet.
No, but I mean, imagine having an office, a government office of compassionate humans who are there to help those in need.
well, we have
Right.
those. We have social services.
We
have,
do, but they're not based on compassion. They're based on laws, and they're based on all these strict requirements, and the needle's constantly moving. I mean, I guess the Republicans' new bill on SNAP just lowered some of the caps on SNAP for food, and so like it's not stable stuff, and it's at the will of the politicians. But like
I mean, my
office
thought
of
is
compassion, I don't know.
My thought is
I wanted
if you take care of look, if you get that fine, if you get the middlemen out of the situation who are just just sucking wealth out of the people, right? Just sucking it out, like just sucking all the wealth out. I think people are inherently good. They're inherently compassionate. They inherently want to take care of other people. Like most people, there's always like, Peterson always says there's 5% of the people that are psychopaths. Fine. Like we'll deal with the 5% that are psychopaths, but most people by and large are going to behave themselves in the interests of humanity. I really, really see that in the people that I meet.
But the people that you meet are not the people who are at the upper echelons. And the upper echelons are probably more than 5% psychopaths because those people get concentrated in positions of power.
Well, not just positions of power, but in these financial games where they're allowed to siphon this money off. And if that position in society no longer exists, if there's no longer a way to just make unearned income, then there's no reason for people to be in those positions and psychopaths to concentrate in these
But
positions.
the psychopath who looks at the Vioxx data and is like, no, it's fine, is not in a position of unearned income.
He's serving investors that are making unearned income. He's not making a decision that's actually good for anybody.
Where he's making a decision that's good for the investors.
But that's the problem with the investors' structure in general.
what I'm seeing here is that we're making all these assessments based on monetary value, right? So our metric is always money.
Well, that's what everybody's driven by because people are terrified. They're all broke, basically.
When you said imagine a new government, right? To me, that says, hey, we can establish a rule of law that's not based on monetary, purely monetary. I mean, how money's a good metric of like energy flow, right? And value, right? And well, it should be, right? Because you brought up earlier mortgages and how our banking system,
Well,
our
a better
GDP
definition for it now is just debt. Like it's really just you're owning other people's debt. That's the fucked up part. Money didn't always used to mean that. Like usually the government prints a coin and the coin represents some goods and that's it, or services, and the government is then capable of forgiving those debts periodically. But when you have a financial structure inserted in the middle that's just siphoning 99% of the wealth away from the population, it can't lead to anything but this like complete dystopian Philip K. Dick nightmare.
Because there's lots of money in the world. Like this is the thing that it really comes down to. It's just that money is locked away in Swiss bank accounts, Cayman bank accounts, places where it can't be put to use. And so it is literally just idle wealth that is then the person who owns it is confronted by the question of, okay, well, I have to make that money make more money because if I just let it sit, it devalues. And so then that money is used to invest in buying up properties or buying up resources or playing the stock market. And so there's almost this parallel world of money that's playing out on the landscape. and it doesn't ever filter back into the pockets of people to be able to spend it. And so that's why Hudson's like, look, if you assume that that money is turning in that economy, and then you insert money from the government by printing it and give it to the people, then that money is circulated through society and is actually able to be put to use. Except, I think that eventually, unless you deal with a financial institution, what's going to happen is that that money just gets put back into the pocket of the corporation and back into the system of unearned income. And so what you end up doing is you'll turn the wheel of the money moving through society, but eventually it goes downstream, and downstream is into the bank accounts. And so it's like, we were at the grocery store last night, and that guy gave you the flyer that had all of the different companies that were owned by Kroger. And it was a list of like 12 of them, I think, and now they're also buying up the Safeway chain, which means that you have one monopoly that's running all of these different food companies, and there's no longer a requirement on price competition. And so whereas before, if you had a Safeway in town and you had a Fred in town and they were competing with one another, the prices would drop. But if Fred owns all 6 of the grocery stores in town, they can jack up the prices as long as you can pay. And if you get money from the government and you can suddenly pay more, then that just goes right back to Fred, because Fred's not going to raise the wages because they don't have to, because the government is paying people. And
it's not Fred though, it's Kroger and their corporation.
Whatever, it's the you're right, it is
right.
Kroger.
So it's going back into the bankers essentially, right? Because the fact of the matter is most of the investors are people with 401ks and stuff like that, and they're just barely squeaking by. Like, they're fighting the inflation of the currency by owning those stocks. That's why they own them. So they're not really, getting, it's really just totally unnecessary that there's this entire class inserted itself into this mix.
I've really struggled with stocks because I've wanted to invest my money, and I really struggle with grappling like, hey, do I want to give my money to this corporation that has questionable practices in the name of profit? Do I want to be a part of this machine and help propagate all these wrongs? And I get stuck because I know, and as I brought up before, there are great communities inside of these corporations. Let's say there's 95% great people in there, right? That aren't totally nuts, right? And they're doing what they can uh, in the best interest of themselves and their community, right? So I think, okay, maybe this is justifiable. Maybe I can do it. But then you hear about Merck, or you hear about just the products themselves are so destructive. Like, Coca-Cola, right? It's like, I like Coca-Cola. I like their beverage. I like the taste of it. I like to have one once in a while. But then I'm like, I got this plastic bottle. What is? Okay.
That's what I'm trying to say, though, is that everybody's complicit in this because of the fact that if you don't invest your money in something, it's not going to be beat by inflation, essentially. Like, even and like, let's say you get a great savings account like you were talking about, you're still feeding the banks is the thing, which are part of this same financial structure that's just siphoning money off, right? So there's no way to get around it. You can't, like, if you go and hide your money under your bed, that's not going to work out for you. If you buy real estate, well, then you're going to be landlording and perpetuating the same the same unearned income scheme that is destroying everything.
I guess you could buy gold. You could buy gold, you could buy platinum, you can buy rare earth minerals, but then it feels like what you're doing is sitting like smog on your hoard of gold, and it's just not... You want to be able to have a way to take your money and apply it to something good that will multiply it. And the problem is that most good things don't multiply your money. That's just, I really genuinely believe that, because...
What about business?
I don't know about that.
Yeah, I don't know.
I was wondering about, the idea of a gift economy, which I don't really know all the mechanics of, but also microfinance. I heard about, these banks that do microloans to like third world countries where like $200 is enough to like start a little business, right? And they just need that $200 loan, and there's just nowhere to get access to $200. But like, you could add a lot of value. And what I kind of dream of future wise is less um or more localized economies, right? And I think this comes down to the fact that we're getting better at making stuff in our garages with 3D printing and with all the robotic stuff that we get. So really, you just need a kind of some basic parts, and you can manufacture a lot of stuff locally with advanced manufacturing. So I dream of a future where everybody in your community has some way of adding value. Maybe they're great gardeners, and at the end of this year they can a bunch of vegetables, and there's a local market, or local honey makers, and what if we find out that, oh, wait a second, we don't actually need to work as much as we think we do to create value. Maybe creating value is a lot less strenuous than we think, and we have more time for leisure. We have more time to raise our kids. And we're just caught in this mill of debt where we have to overproduce, and you know, and it just, like you said, it gets siphoned off. But I think the danger is to look at money as something that's evil or bad, or it's really just, I think, a code for value. And as far as the people go, it should be value based. Like, your salary should be based on what value you bring to your industry. However, though, it's been hijacked. And that's the financial system is siphoning off our value that we add to our community. So
yeah, it's a lot simpler because he brings up these ancient civilizations that the state issued currency, and it gave them the ability to periodically forgive debts on its citizens, right? If there was a bad harvest one year. Actually, he said that every time these Sumerian king, maybe he was talking about the ancient Greeks, the pre-classic Greeks, and how they would occasionally just forgive the debt. And they had that ability because there wasn't an intermediary. Right now, the government borrows its
stockholders.
Yeah, well, we borrow our money. Our government borrows its money from this bank, which is made up of private institutions, right? And so they're just inserted into the mix. And he's like, you don't need to do that. And like, the treasury's there to print money. There's no reason to have this external bank. It does nothing but screw everybody. It's just siphoning off all of the wealth to a few billionaires who are at the top, essentially. And there's no reason for it. And there's no way, like, our country is buried in debt. Individuals are buried in debt.
How much debt per capita? Is that like, I don't know. I think the last time I heard it's like $55,000. It's probably up to like 100,000. Like
$96,000 for every single person living in the United States.
So
man,
we
woman,
all,
and child.
over our life,
like, people just work to pay off their debts their whole life, and they never get there. Most of them.
We're never going to get there.
Well, so hold on. Sorry, that's for the national debt. That's not.
That's for our national debt.
Yeah,
which is a more confusing metric.
The average household debt is $58,000.
Okay, not a big difference.
No,
well, so if you consider national debt and personal
debt. No, the
debt.
national debt, that's what I was interested in. What is the national debt per capita?
So national debt per capita is $96,000.
So, that's like every single one of us has a loan out, like, that's due for $95,000, and as a country, we have to pay back these loans for every single person. I don't think we're ever gonna. I mean, is it just always gonna be? They'll just keep raising the debt limit, and as long as. Anyways, I'm not an economist. I don't know how this stuff works, but it doesn't. It seems like a Ponzi scheme.
I mean, I've almost never gone back and listened to one of our conversations after we recorded it, but I might go back and listen to that one again because it was crazy how this dude was breaking it down for us.
What was his name again?
Michael Hudson.
Badass
Badass economist.
Check it out.
Yeah, he's lectured at all sorts, in Chicago and Harvard, and I think he's got a part-time position in China right now. But it seemed like the main issue was that this money is just essentially, money by itself can be created by the government. They can print it. They can do that. But you can't if you got to borrow it from private people, essentially, which is the way this whole structure is set up. And it wasn't always this way. The Fed is a fairly recent invention. I mean, it's from the early 1900s?
Yeah, when did they get rid of the gold? Was that when they got off gold standard, or was the
Yeah,
Fed there
I
before
think
that?
it was correlated with that. I'm not. I don't know the history as
The
well as
gold
I should.
standard ended in 1933.
So what? Why did? I mean, I feel like creating the Fed, there must have been a good reason for it. I don't. Well,
Well, the
to
stock
the
market
power, to
crashes.
the powers
The
that
stock
be.
market
The
crashes.
Fed
right?
was created before the stock market crashes. The Federal Reserve System
Oh
started
yeah, that
in
was the
1913.
FDIC. Sorry.
Yes. So the gold standard ended in 33 and the Fed began in 13.
Well, what do we have to do? You know, what's our recourse here? I mean,
I
we're
actually
talking
made a
about all
list of
this
them.
good stuff.
I want to hear you respond to this list that he gave me. It's kind of crazy. He was like, first thing you got to do is take all of the private finance out of elections, so that the government
that's
is
a no-brainer.
no-brainer.
That's lots of benefits.
He said
to that.
Complete debt forgiveness on human services like housing, food,
that's a
healthcare, right? Because a lot of people's debt comes down to those three things, especially housing. And then finally, no usury for non-earning. Usury is only available in the commercial sector for, but you tax non-earning services like renters and extractors and lenders and things like this.
I'm not sure I understand this one. What do you mean by usury?
So that's borrowing at interest. It's actually interesting, like several kingdoms in the old world outlawed usury altogether because they realized that it was a corrupting force. And I think Hudson's like, usury's okay if it's competing companies doing it with each other. He's like, you just shouldn't be able to do it to people for basic services, right?
Wait, so can you go back up though?
I haven't finished the list too, but yeah.
I know, but what does he mean by canceling debt on housing? I didn't get to react to that one all the way. Or
Yeah.
what?
I don't think that was actually specifically debt that doesn't get canceled.
I think he said on basic human services like food, healthcare, housing, things like that.
So that you can't have debt for that?
Oh,
It's like not allowed,
education also was another one.
So you have a loan period, right? So you take a mortgage, and the mortgage is a 30-year mortgage. And the expectation is that you will work to pay that debt off, but sometimes people can't. And so they end up underwater on their mortgage. Or they pay for some fraction of time, and then they're basically at a point where they can't afford to pay it anymore. And his point is, he was like, look, during the 2008 crisis, what happened is that there are people that are underwater on mortgages that they probably shouldn't have gotten in the first place, but at least they had housing. And what happened is that when they couldn't pay their loans, the banks kicked them out of their houses and repossessed the houses, but they couldn't sell the houses for the price that they sold them for in the first place.
Yeah, bottom for in the first place.
That they were sold for in the first place.
Gotcha.
And
wow.
The problem is that you have the banks not making back their loan and all of these people kicked out. And so it makes far more sense to forgive the debt that the person can't pay.
Or just modify the loan to like a more reasonable term.
Exactly.
And then they can have a better hope of recapturing the original loan amount.
But I think that what ended up happening, from what I understand, is that all of those foreclosed on houses are now being bought up by private equity firms. Like BlackRock is buying a lot of houses. And so the banks actually, if they held onto them for long enough for that to be a place where the global money supply is going, would then be able to sell them at a higher price than they would just by having an auction or something.
He's basically like, get the banks the hell out of these basic human needs.
Well, now they're doing fractional home ownership, right?
I don't know what that is.
Well, like you can invest in home ownership. I think Amazon is doing this, where Amazon's buying houses, but they're obligated to only own them for 5 years. So they're going to buy a house, own it for 5 years, let it appreciate, right? And then they're going to sell it. And when they sell it, they're going to, cash out all the profits and pay all the investors. So like 5 people might go in on buying one house for 5 years. And so it's a way to create a market, an investment market for housing where it's a lower bar of entry. And it just seems so,
meanwhile,
it seems so funny, right?
The money's
because
being siphoned off still.
Are you going to be renting a house from Amazon while you own like a fraction of like 20 other homes. Like, like, it just seems weird.
I didn't
the
even
whole
make it to
situation.
the number one on this list.
Sorry. Go ahead. Let's get back to your list.
But I think it's the most interesting one, which is
Wait, can you just do the list again?
yeah.
Points?
This is really important, and we need to make sure we understand these pretty well. And there might be more to add to this list. This is just the 4 things that we talked
That you
about.
wrote down. Okay.
So we had no private finance in elections, this debt forgiveness on basic human services, which we've been talking about. And then the other one is a little trickier to unpack, but it's essentially that usury is restricted to the commercial sector and that you tax non-earning services like renters and extractors and financial. That's what I meant.
Yeah. That's what was confusing.
Sorry,
I was like,
that's not the right word.
The rentier class.
Rentier, that's it.
The rentier class are the people that own assets
the properties. Yeah.
that just give them unearned income. So earned income is stuff that is wages. Unearned income is stuff that's passive. So your investments, your properties, your whatevers.
Yeah, that's what I had. I just couldn't read my own crappy handwriting. But then the most interesting piece, which he pointed out about these successful states in the past, was that they were headed by a divine king. So before you flip out about that, though, because obviously, like, everybody just quakes in their boots at the idea of like a religious monarchy, but he points out that what they weren't really religious figureheads in the sense that we think of dogmatic religion today. They were just supposed to embody this ultimate ideal of harmony with the land, among the citizens. It was this role of indebtedness to some higher purpose besides just your own egotistical drive. And I think that like whatever constitution that we would come up with in this beautiful state of the future would have to be headlined under some mission statement that was aimed at something higher than individual profit.
Well, that's awesome. And I'm all about the one-to-one change, right? Is you look at the last few years here, 5 years or so, or even 10 years, I guess. But like Me Too, right? Me Too and is an example of the collective conscious, the collective mind of humanity saying, wait a second, this isn't okay anymore. This is not how we want to do business. And a lot of leaders fell out of good standing with society because of these moral ills, right? So as we individually sort of change our beliefs and ultimately develop more compassion for our fellow man, only then will we start to really, create that higher belief in our society and our groups, and have the foundation support to have a moral leadership, right?
There's also some baseline level of like when people have a boot on their neck, it's very difficult for them to concern themselves with compassion for their neighbor. And so, assuming that we'd solved that problem, I think that's what I was saying. Like a few minutes
ago. You're in debt
ago.
for 30 years. Like, yeah, that's a nice boot on your neck,
right? And I think that if you let that up, I think
don't lose your job. Or you're not going to be able to keep your house,
right? But don't you think people inherently are compassionate if they're not completely stressed out about like? Absolutely. When I lose my compassion personally, like in an argument or something or whatever, it's because I'm really stressed out about something.
You're already at your bottom,
right?
Okay, so hold on. I would say something about that, which is that the United States was the most comfortable that it has ever been in the 50s and 60s, and that was the time of the terrible conflicts over civil rights. And so the idea that compassion somehow just naturally flows from people that are well off doesn't seem to hold based off of how difficult it was to get desegregation or something like that.
No, they did it, though. They were actually able to rally. The thing is, like, terrible atrocities like race hate and race crime was going nuts before that. I mean, we had chattel slavery at some point. I think it takes that level of comfort in the civilization for people to stand up for their, Black brothers and sisters and really have the energy and to even concern themselves with those problems. I mean, a lot of the freedom fighters were wealthy Jewish kids from upstate who were coming down. I don't know about a lot, but those were definitely some of the early ranks.
Think about the first, congressman to accept a meeting with the leadership, like with MLK or with, like you have to have a certain, everything's incremental. Like, yeah, my parents' generation probably have a little more embedded racism. It's just a part of how they were brought up, right? And it's going to take them their entire lifetime to dismantle some of those ills. And it's going to take a lifetime of reflection um, on understanding, hey, why do I have those feelings about, or this fear about this or that, or from this other, racial group, or, really analyzing yourself for like, hey, I'm walking down the street and I saw somebody and I felt fear. So I crossed the street, like assessing why did you have those feelings against that other person? What was rooted in that? Was it our entertainment? You have a whole lifetime to evolve on this stuff. So think about back in the 50s and 60s, back when, the white, middle upper class was comfortable seeing some of these atrocities happen. They had the ability to step an inch towards equality, and that inch was just enough for that first congressman or person to have that meeting with that leader from the movement, and to listen, and willing to entertain listening, just listening, just saying, hey, I will give you a chance, I will listen to you. That took some courage. That probably took that person some courage to allow that to happen, for the fear of ridicule, or for the fear of losing votes in their district or whatever. You know what I mean? Like that was an incremental step, and it's all movements are just a series of incremental steps between people. So how do you move the needle forward? I think it's always about one person at a time. It's about you influencing your neighbors. Um, it's about you guys with your channel. You have a broader audience, but for me, it's about connecting with, my family, with my neighbors, with my colleagues, and just planting the seeds of a new way of thinking, right? And over a course of a generation, those seeds hopefully get some water poured on them, and they flourish. If the seeds that don't really work right, they're not going to get watered, and they're going to fall out of popularity, right? They're going to be let go to die. So that's what I always I guess that's my hope right there. That's my future, is like having that belief that all we really need to do is, well, number one is change ourselves, right? Be the change that we seek, right? And then number two is,
And I just want to say, man, like you're one of the coolest people I know for this, because you go out in the world and you make people laugh everywhere you go, man. Like you come back from like going to freaking Burger King or something, and you've had like this transformative experience with somebody every single time, man. Like we're out at the seeing the band last night, and you're just like, this lady is kind of making fun of us or something, but you just completely turn it on its head. And I even noticed it, man. If I make a conscious effort to just smile at people when I'm going to the grocery store, it's crazy how I think it really does change the world. It's amazing. Like it's hard to imagine if every single person did that.
man, it could be just holding the door open. It could be a smile. Someone's having a bad day, and you just give them a wink or a smile, or you say, hey, I really like your shorts, or, you know what I mean? That can just snap someone out of like a really low point in their psyche. Like they just wake them back up, and reinvigorate them back into this world, right?
It's wildly powerful. Some guy just handed me you go to Costco and there's like this train of people trying to get to the carts when you show up.
Yeah.
And I was going up to get this cart, and this guy like grabbed it ahead of me, and I was just like, my first thought was like, oh, asshole or whatever.
Yeah.
But he handed it to me, and I was just like, it like completely threw me off my heels. I was just like, whoa, that's badass. Why don't I ever hand people cards? Like, it's infectious.
Man, paying it forward at Starbucks. Like, that's a great symptom of a evolving humanity, right? Hey, I'm going to pay it forward today, right? I want to buy the next guy's whatever, right? That's cool, man. That's super cool. What if everyone paid everything forward? Like
It's hard to imagine.
I don't know how the math works out, but like, I brought up the idea of a gift economy is like, what if we had to spend or we had to give a X amount of dollars and we're given a certain amount of dollars every month that we have to give, right?
That's what tithing is, right?
Yeah, what if we tied to our friends? I mean, and then people are going to send us money in return. Like, you know what I mean?
It's kind of like before we started the show, I would have never thought that was possible, but that's pretty much how we're making it happen here. We just start, people. We're on a gift economy essentially, right? We're entirely supported by people listening to this show who are just like, yeah, I appreciate what you're doing, and I want to make sure you guys have the ability to do that in the future.
Yeah, and I mean, where you shop, what you buy, like, knowing that Freddy's is part of the Kroger family now, and talking to the gentleman in the electronics section of Freddy's, and his frustration with not getting enough hours working there, and anyhow, he brought up the fact that Winco, a competitor, is employee owned.
Sort
I
of.
guess 51%,
No, it's
right?
50. It's 49% worker owned.
49%.
Yeah. The workers don't have any controlling ability.
See, that's a bummer.
Yeah,
but
it's
at least you have some of you, like you have some skin in the game, right? That when you work hard and you go above and beyond, the idea is that somehow it comes back to you through your ownership. I mean, that's cool.
The fully worker-owned companies are incredible. Like we did that little tour after grad school, talking to all these worker-owned businesses, and in its most ideal form, it's a really, really, stable, sustainable ecosystem. But it has to be absolute is the thing. Like you can't have a single stockholder that's not a worker. Otherwise, it very quickly devolves into a typical corporation.
Isn't there a bakery in the Bay Area, Arizmendi's?
Yep.
It's all
We
employee
interviewed them,
owned.
too. There's an amazing robotics firm up in Wisconsin that we visited. I mean, just incredible. They do all of the engineering. So they have a room where the engineers are. It's right next to where the assemblers or the machinists are. And then the assemblers are in this big aircraft hangar. And they're all intermeshing all day. And they've been incredible. They weathered all of the economic downturns. They were the only company that sailed through those things when things were going overseas, and they just kept it going. It's pretty badass. But I think most people don't know about it. It's very difficult to start a firm that way because you have to have some capital and you can't borrow it. You can't sell shares to borrow your capital investments. So it's tricky to get big scale projects going, but there's a few of them. The Mondragon Corporation, you know about them? In Spain, in the Basque Country, there's this huge, I think it's one of the biggest corporations in Spain, and it's completely worker owned. The town's got worker owned banks, got worker owned, mechanics, everything is worker owned, and it's really liberated those people. Us is deeply investigating something over here in the corner.
I'm trying to figure out how deeply Winco is actually it is employee owned because, and it's still unclear. I'm trying to figure it out. But before that, I was looking at the fractional ownership thing that Amazon is doing that you were talking about. Oh, really? And it is crazy. So what it is it's a retail investment platform that they've built that you can invest $100, $1,000 into a rental property that, 1,000 other people are putting that same amount of money into. And then you get passive income off of that rental property. So it's a huge corporation that's bought up homes. And now the way that they're financing them is that they're financing them through retail investments. So what you're doing is you're perpetuating this like vacation rental property existence. But as somebody who can't afford your own house, you're investing in somebody else continuing to rent.
And it's just still chock full of renters who are going into crazy debt, and it's just perpetuating.
I mean, rent doesn't necessarily put you into debt.
No, but all the other things in your life too. Even if you're paying your hard-earned wages immediately to rent, then you're still going into debt for other services like healthcare.
No, you might not be. I mean, that's definitely a risk, but I don't think it's fair to say that everybody who's a renter is in massive amounts of debt.
Well, technically they're in debt because they're renting. Like they owe money at the end of the month.
I think that debt has to be something that's carried.
Yeah, I mean, like, is food debt? If I have to buy food every month, am I in debt to food? Or
If you put it on a credit card, for sure.
But few people put rent on a credit card. I'm just saying that like there's difference between payments and rents and debts. Debts are something that
Let me
you
ask you this:
literally don't
is
have enough
Amazon
money.
owning the land that they're doing this with, or are they?
No, they're buying the land, and so you're getting a fractional investment on land that is purchased. You own that piece of land as long as you remain part of the investment.
And
You
are
just don't-
banks involved in this? That's my question, I guess.
I don't think
Amazon probably has their own
is-
financial
No,
arm doing it.
these are the way that this works is that there's a house that they want to buy, and they are waiting until they collect enough people who can buy the property.
Do they mortgage it from a bank though?
I don't think so, because they collect the money from the people that is the cost of the house. And so then all of the payments and fees you get as dividends from that are profits that are generated from that by being rented out.
But Amazon takes some share of that.
Most of
obviously.
it.
Most of it, and then they distribute to their investors, right?
Yes.
So
But there's no, I mean, like, I agree with you that I'm saying that it's still a problematic thing because it's perpetuating the whole like renter class. But I'm confused about your use of debt in this case. Because the person who's renting that has enough money in the bank from their paychecks to pay rent isn't in debt. That's by definitionally, it's not debt.
Nasha, is that true that in 5 years they sell the property?
Some mature in 5 years, some mature in 10 years. Each one has basically a little chart.
Oh, okay,
where
so once
they
it matures, they sell it.
Yeah, because they're trying to time the market. So they buy the house, the market grows, and then when they sell the house, then you get the larger dividend off of the sale. And in the meantime, you get the dividend off of rent and fees. If it's a vacation rental, property management takes like 25%. Amazon and it's not Amazon. So it's a Jeff Bezos backed company, but it's not associated with Amazon.
I mean, Hudson was definitely advocating for the idea that the state owns the land, first of all, because he's like, there's no reason for these houses to cost as much as they do. There's no reason people can't own homes. If the state owns the lands, then they auction the lands off at some reasonable price that's not driven by this mortgage program. And therefore, people actually owe maybe some fraction of their paycheck to pay for the land that they've been auctioned, that they bought in an auction, but it's not at an interest rate, right? Because they're paying it back to the government who owned it in the first place.
What about competition, though? I mean, maybe like everyone wants to be on
That's
the
auction.
seaside.
That's the auction idea, right? So there
Okay,
is
so you
still
auction
definitely
off-
there's a gradient for sure. Like not everybody can live in Santa Monica, but
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be this outrageously exorbitant scheme where you basically are paying for the rest of your life 25% of your paycheck to a bank that's siphoning that money and concentrating it in the hands of like a person somewhere.
By the way, the Kroger-Albertsons Safeway merger hasn't happened yet. It's
about to.
It's about to, and there's a bunch of, I mean, everybody recognizes that it's a monopoly that's about to happen, and so there's lots of people that are trying to advocate to stop it. They're going to have to go to court. It's probably another couple years away, but they're definitely trying to do it.
They've already printed the bags.
What's the other?
They haven't. They weren't on
No,
the
not
bags
yet. What's the other competitor to Kroger?
It was
I forget.
Albertsons, and so Albertsons owns Safeway.
No, but I mean, there's got to be another. I mean, there's Whole Foods, right? That's
It's
Amazon.
not really a competitor, though. The people who shop at Kroger are like different
True that.
demographics. Like there is
But
not a
there's
Whole
no
Foods
other-
for 200 miles here. Yeah, like that's the depth to it. The closest one's in Bend. There's right. So that's what I'm saying. Like no, well maybe Eugene, but that's about 200 miles.
Didn't we have some points in our history where the monopolies were shaken up really strongly in the early 20th century?
Yeah, but it was around the time of FDR, and it was a time of a lot of civil action on behalf of the people against these companies. And I think that in the intervening years, they have set up systems to make sure that that sort of control never happens again quite so easily. Time for a refresh.
It is time for a refresh. I just think that I'm going to keep saying it till I'm blue in the face. If we're going to have a refresh, we better have a damn good idea of what comes next. Otherwise, it could be a lot worse, right? Because there's some really gnarly, strong people out there that would do the same thing the bankers are doing, but for themselves, right? You can imagine a real tyranny coming in the aftermath of this clearly unstable situation that we have going right now?
I think it's going to be a big impetus for change, Shiloh, is disclosure
Ah,
UFOs. And this has been something that's been on my radar for ever since the David Grush testimonies. And now I found out today he's going to have a public hearing with Congress. No video, but they are going to broadcast, I guess, a hearing to Congress. So
why no video? That's weird.
I don't know. Maybe they got classified images that they don't want to share with us. But since December of 2022, Congress passed a law protecting all these whistleblowers who signed NDAs, and basically is saying, hey, this law basically voids any NDAs you signed about these types of projects, right? So people are lining up, and the more I read about it, the more I hear that whistleblowers are coming forward to disclose basically the shadow government projects, all those projects that are being funded by our taxpayer dollars, that Congress doesn't know about, that the president might not even know about. There are programs that are siphoning off our taxpayer dollars that are outside the purview of our lawmakers and our executive. That's, I think, by definition, a shadowy government or a shadowy enterprise, right? And the fact that there might be technology, there might be ETs, there might be a whole presence out there. When we have disclosure about this stuff, especially if there's ET life, which I believe there is, if humanity is faced with this reality that we are a part of a galactic community, I think that's going to have a pretty big impact on how we see our world, how we see our actions, how we see what we're doing. If it's possible that we might know a lot more about science than we publicly know. Like these entities might have access to technology that could change humanity. Like a 0-point energy. It sounds like it's impossible.
How about
right?
it's just a functional constitution? They're like, all right, here guys,
no,
here's how it works.
Yeah, but like, every little drip has its possibilities. Like if we had a better technology, what if we had a technology that could help us clean up pollution? Like what if we have some new gadgets, new technology? I mean, if we have human what do we call these? Human replicate vehicles, or HRVs, or I can't think of the acronym, or alien reproduction vehicles, ARVs. So some claim that we've reverse engineered these technology, and we have technology that's out of this world technology, literally out of this world technology. We have access to. We've reverse engineered. Maybe we don't understand the physics of it, but it exists. Right? What are the possibilities if we can disclose all this technology and all this new scientific, technological knowledge to the public? Right? Think about all those engineers out there and scientists who have had these inklings, these beliefs, there's this humdrum of ideas and going on in their mind, but they just can't put their finger on it. And now we get permission. To understand that it is real, that it is possible. It is possible to do intergalactic travel, right? Like that's going to change how we think. It's going to change. And people have said that even when we do have a mass disclosure type event, there's still going to be people who don't believe. There's still going to be people who are deniers and are going to say, no way this is true. It's all a hoax. It's all conspiracy. Even if aliens come in the middle of a soccer match, right, and land and make an announcement, there's still going to be people who think that it was a setup, that it was fake, that it's not true, right?
Well, I think they got to see the technology come to their lives.
Yeah, I mean, like finding truth is like how true. Like, what do we need? What's the threshold for truth? And I think that varies by person, right? So there's, but considering that, if there is a mass disclosure event, which this has been predicted by many different sources that I'm familiar with, like, that's going to make a big change. I think that's the takeaway. And that's going to open up a whole new way of thinking about how we govern ourselves, how we consume products, how we, what we eat. I mean, I think it's going to impact everything. And so that's an exciting, to me, that's an exciting proposition here, or a exciting possibility of a future, right? Is this disclosure event, and that will give us the permission to make big change, I think.
And what's interesting is that I don't think it matters if it's aliens or military technology, because at the end of the day, if there is something to be disclosed, then it will become apparent, because the way that things pass into reality is that they become a phenomenon that everyone can see. And right now, the weirdest thing about the UAP stuff is the fact that there's a group of people that have seen them, and there's a group of people that haven't. And so the minute that you have a technology that is somewhere where people can go and see it and verify it for themselves, then you have the ability to start moving forward and actually iterating it and figuring out how to apply it. And if that's the end result of disclosure, then fine. I think that the narrative around alien or domestic is kind of like...
Absolutely. I don't think it matters. People are seeing stuff in the skies that they've never, that's not explainable by conventional aircraft, right? And there's stuff flying around. Let's say it is all human made, right? The fact of the matter is we still don't know who's making it. We don't know how it works as a public. We don't know that this technology officially exists. But again, if it does, the way these craft fly and appear and disappear and shoot off and can travel thousands of miles per hour in an instant tells me there's technology out there that could revolutionize how we live. And frankly, if you have if you have gravity machines, as an engineer who builds railroads and highways and all this infrastructure, do we need this infrastructure? Do we need a society that's all connected by roads? If I can just jump in my little hovercraft, or I can just fly, and they're silent, and why do I need all this road, right? I can restore roads back to nature, and I can say, you know what, nature, you can have that back. You can have that for some meadow. You can have that back for a forest, right?
Well, and the first, who approves transportation stuff? There's like some federal commission.
NTSB?
No, there's all kinds of different organizations that deal with transportation. Local agencies which are chartered to manage it can be city transportation, it can be county transportation, it could be there can be conglomerations of cities working together to provide public transportation.
I was thinking of
the
the
state
FAA.
and federal as far.
I was thinking of the FAA. So the FAA has just authorized testing of the first flying car.
Yeah.
And so
I saw a headline about
the
that.
future is coming. And I think that you're absolutely right about this idea that if we can change the way that we do stuff, then we can start to remove the pressures that we've been putting on the earth for so long. And it seems to me that that's the only answer. We have to dematerialize our civilization so that the impacts that we have are progressively less and less. And that's circular economies, that's new forms of transportation, that's new forms of energy, that's new forms of financial markets. And all of these things are progressively developing, and the question is, how do we get them to develop in a way that aligns with a better future for humans rather than just more of the same crap? And I think that that's the greatest challenge.
Because when I think of flying cars, I'm like, okay, a few billionaires are going to have flying cars.
Yeah,
right?
but a few billionaires had, access to airplanes. I guess that's not technically true. But
no, I think that it has to be, all these things have to be fixed simultaneously or in parallel, right? Like you can't have just a system where the same siphoning is going on, right? You need to take the boot off of people's necks who are in debt. You need to take the boot off the environment, and the environment's such a crazy word, but off of nature, right? We need a healthy ecosystem. We need healthy plants and animals. We need healthy food. We need healthy water, and we need mental health, where people aren't just face down in the trenches. I mean, people are killing themselves at unheard of rates right now. It's a really depressing environment. This is not a healthy mental situation, spiritual situation.
In what way are you? Is that related to the drugs?
I think
Like
we
drug
didn't even talk
deaths,
about drugs, but I think like
addiction deaths,
it is,
right?
but suicides are up. I mean, it's hard to imagine being a kid these days too, like facing this narrative of humans being kind of a plague on the earth, and you don't really have much prospects. I mean, probably not going to own a home if you're a kid. That's not really a dream. Like, good luck thinking about having kids, right? It's a depressing landscape. I mean, you have kids. I don't have kids, but when I face like my students, I feel a lot of this depression where they're just facing this future that seems unpromising and seems heavy.
It seems heavy, yeah. And well, frankly, that's what gets people's attention is the fear of change. And you turn on the news, you read the headlines, whatever, you get in there, and of course, the most fearful stuff is the stuff that you click on and you want to know about. And I don't know, I maybe I'm a bit more optimistic. I feel like we have time. And I don't say that because I'm lazy and I'm like, oh, I'll do it tomorrow, or I'll just keep kicking the can down the road. Um, but I'm confident, or I guess I have faith in the fact that just these incremental one person to one person advances in our like personal enlightenment is going to be enough. Because we exist on all layers of our society. I mean, from um, we exist in all these different tiers, and if at every tier we improve ourselves, right, we're going to find solutions. We're going to find a new way. We're going to make things better. Um, and not to
We
panic. I
don't
mean,
have
we
like
have
that
time.
narrative though.
Yeah.
Like, people really need ideologies to rally around, and like you have you have a beautiful mindset, but in some sense, like, I don't mean to put you down in any way, but like, you're privileged to this incredibly pristine upbringing, and I'm not sure that like bad upbringings excuse people for bad behavior, but the optimism that you have is like not codified in any central way. That like, when you think of like, I would love to go to another country and be like, yeah, I'm an American, and they're like, when they think of American, they think of what you're talking about. That would be fucking amazing.
Yeah. Well, you're right. I am, but it's interesting because you see when there's calamities like for instance that train derailed and there's all this gas coming out, and the community rallied. They got together. Number one, it was terrible what was happening on this. The air was terrible. Um, but they came together in some way, and they came together through a really negative situation. Likewise with any kind of environmental disaster, right? These are impetus, or these are catalysts for us to come together and connect with our neighbors and help each other, right? And so unfortunately, you need those catalysts. You talk about the 5% psychopath, sociopaths that run the world. Well, like that 5%, they might make decisions that are bad and people get very upset about. And that might be an impetus for change right there. It's like you kind of, you just got to roll with it. But, you know, as I guess what's the alternative to this, right? I'm saying it's person to person to person to person, right? That's the way you affect change. Let's say you go for a specific cause, right? What does that look like,
I think it
right?
looks.
How can you single-handedly go make some big change, right?
I don't know if I can, but I think that understanding what what a new constitution would look like, what a state that would protect us from these insidious corruptions would look like, is part of the issue. Because I don't think any one person drafts a constitution and people adopt it. It's got to be a movement, right? It's got to be a movement that's rooted in an ideology which is congruent with the future that we want to have. Like, people are motivated by ideologies; they need something to believe in, right? And so, if there was that level of concerted belief in what this future could look like, I think it wouldn't be that hard to draft such a thing and make it happen.
What if you changed every board member on every Fortune 500 company, and you change every single leader to just have 5% more compassion? Just 5%.
They get fired by
What?
their shareholders
You think so?
for sure. Yeah, they're just fired by
Profits
the
drop?
numbers 100% of the time.
Okay.
So there's
So,
there's
that's not
systematic
enough.
issues, right?
But
Right, because compassion is something that is contingent. Compassion can only be contingent on there not being something that is more important than that. Because if you are in a marriage or in a friendship, compassion is really important because the marriage, the friendship, the relationship depends on that compassion. But if you are somebody who's a compassionate person, but you are sitting at the helm of a company that has shareholders, your compassion goes only as far as the bottom line rises.
Yeah, I'm
Well,
sure
this is
they're really
funny,
nice
wait.
to their dog and everything, you know?
you guys assume that having a compassionate business would not be profitable. So I question, what's that based on?
Well, that's based on the sum total of experience that I've had in the world.
So if you
It's kind of a
if you
Ouija
pay,
board, dude.
Yeah, if you pay your employees more, you pay them a living wage, maybe your quality goes up.
Well, I mean, like, look at Walmart.
Yeah.
So Walmart could pay their employees more, but the
Mhm.
profits would drop.
Yep.
So it has to come out of somebody's pockets because there's an X number of people that shop at Walmart. And you could make the case that, okay, if we pay our employees more and we became more like Costco, maybe more people would shop with us because they didn't have the bad taste or whatever. But that would require then competing with Costco, which already has its devoted market share. It already has the
Mhm.
people that go there and prefer it. And so you'd have to spend a lot of money on marketing. You'd have to put a lot of effort into transitioning that. And that's why you can't do it, because you'd probably have a couple of bad years. And those couple
Walmart's
of bad
kind of a
years
bad
are
example
enough
'cause
to replace you.
Yeah.
Walmart's owned by like a single family too. So conceivably they could actually make decisions, but most of these corporations are just owned by shareholders. And so the mandate of the CEO fundamentally is to make money for the shareholders.
Walmart is owned by shareholders.
Oh, I thought it was owned by the Waltons.
I mean, the Waltons founded it, but it's a publicly traded company.
Gotcha. So
Yeah, interesting. Yep. So maybe we're not there yet because we're still monetary. We're so focused on monetary gain, and because we have this stakeholder and
boot on the neck, dude. Boot on the neck.
Shareholders are holding things down. Yeah. So that's not going to work unless you have an enlightened ownership class. The whole class of stockholders says, "Hey, you know what? I'm just happy that Walmart's running well."
What if they were the workers who owned it?
Well, that's different too. See, like, I guess that there is more to it than you just. Maybe I'm illustrating my own point in another kind of way. In that, if you just tweak one knob, it's not enough.
No, you're right.
All the knobs have to be tweaked.
1,000%.
Right? And that can't be achieved by just having a singular minded focus. I mean, maybe that's not true. But I feel like it's more effective. It's just less visible. It's slower, right? Me Too was a huge movement, right? That was a big, focused, very directional movement, right? And it had a huge impact on leadership. A lot of leaders fell out of favor as they were exposed in the Me Too movement, right? A lot of our heroes were exposed as like naughty. They got put on the naughty list, and that shifted rather quickly. So there are those major events that are like a catalyst, right? And then once that happens, it's like the seeds go out and start infecting beyond the initial. It was really focused on Hollywood, right? But then it started going into workplaces, and then workplace training, right? I had to get training on Me Too after it came out. And there was a lot of reinvigoration of that stuff and a hyper focus on it. And so there is that. I guess maybe you need an event, but it's followed by that one-to-one change. So yeah.
Yeah, I think
we just keep
everything
on
needs to
trucking.
happen in parallel. All these solution sets have to be adopted in parallel.
I really wonder what's going to happen in the next big stock market crash, right?
Well, there was
be
one kind of recently. I mean, the stocks dropped an incredible amount last year. Was it last year? I don't know.
It doesn't seem to be impacting jobs though.
Well, the bigger
you know-
problem is people don't want to work these jobs. That seemed there's a huge dearth of hiring, right? Because people can't find people to work these crummy jobs at these low salaries.
Well, because the profits are being like you were saying about you. Was it that the Burger King or something? You were talking
Yeah.
to people, and the management wasn't putting enough people
Yeah,
on
this
shift.
Burger King. This is a funny story. Go to the Burger King, and it's like almost 4 o'clock, and I'm able to order in the dining room, and right after 4 o'clock, another gentleman walks in, wants to order, and the manager says, "Sorry, sir, I can't serve you right now. I'm understaffed, and I'm about to come off my shift. If you want to get food, you need to go through the drive-through." And he got very upset about that. But as it happened, after kind of all the drama went away and I was finishing up my meal, I was chatting with the manager and I was like, "Yo, this is really weird. How come you guys aren't understaffed?" And she was like, "Well, the owner doesn't want to staff out these shifts enough, right?" And meanwhile, the manager, her friend, was who was not working, who had the day off. He got hired at the same Burger King for 5 hours a week. And I was just thinking, what the hell is going on at this Burger King where they're understaffing it day in and day out and just working their employees to death, right? And then when they do hire somebody, they only give them 5 freaking hours. Like, how is that? And the poor kid who only had 5 hours, he's like, "Yeah, well, I do DoorDash." So he's like, "I got the money coming. You know, I'm getting enough."
Is that just
you know?
bad management,
But-
or that doesn't seem like it's profitable?
Yeah, it just and it takes a lot of money and effort to like hire somebody, right?
Yeah.
It's not like it's like you can just go hire people every day. It's effort. It's like it takes time. It costs money to buy them uniforms and get them trained, right? And just hire somebody. How you get 5 hours, and yeah, we're gonna keep the dining room understaffed and piss off our
It sounds like an absentee.
piss off our customers.
Sounds like an absentee owner, like somebody who's just sitting there,
totally
collecting passive income, not really taking
the
much interest.
franchisee. Yeah, the franchisee of this Burger King was definitely not following protocol, and I think some of the employees were like, "Yeah, if this was a corporately owned Burger King, this would not be allowed." Like they would say, "Nope, if you don't have enough people behind the counter, you gotta lock the dining room, like lock it out. Like it's probably not even safe for them to be understaffed. Like what if there's, a fire or an emergency, anyways. So super sketchy, all in the name of profit, right?
And that's
Passive profit in that case.
Passive profit, absentee franchisee owner.
Yeah.
I think that's what HUD was on about. Is there's just a lot of these like worms in between the cracks of all of these different wealth generating instruments that we have. There's just worms who have gotten in, and they're literally taking everything. It's just gutted it, and the result is not that people are starving; it's that they're just depressed. They don't have hope for the future. They don't have hope that their only hope is that they can join the gang and somehow get a position of the same sort of unearned income.
I mean, I just imagine if that Burger King was owned by a more compassionate and more just aware, connected to his employees mindset, he would see that number one, customer service is really shitty at this Burger King because the girl, rightfully so, was just like, "Hey, sir, I can't serve you," and then they end up getting in a freaking shouting match.
But who would make a better?
What's funny? In the time that they were shouting at each other, she could have rang him up for whatever he ordered, and they could have been done with it. But it was just all around a really silly situation, and it's because the franchisee who owns that Burger King is not willing to put enough staff on the floor. And if he
has no idea.
If he cared.
He has no idea.
He doesn't care. He probably gets his monthly finance report. Okay, yeah, we're profiting. We're profiting. And
but what better person? What better owner than the people who are actually running the place?
Oh, absolutely. That would be way more beneficial.
Well, I mean, the path towards that is just people buying out the stocks of the companies they worked for. That's what Winco did when they transitioned to employee ownership, is that the employees came together, they bought the stocks, and then they became the majority owners of the company.
Are they the majority?
the majority. I can't get to the bottom of if they're 100% or not.
Oh, okay. I thought that when I looked when we first moved to Portland, I saw that it was like 49%.
It's unclear. It's hidden behind a bunch of layers. The people who work there do seem to have nice things to say about it. But the point is that you can actually influence the direction of your company if you band together and you all buy the shares, and then you say, we're going to decide how this is going to go. And that's to me, it seems like a real possible motion towards changing corporations that already exist. Because when we talk about Mondragon or something, they're a manufacturing company. They make washing machines, fridges, steel plates, cars. They have that, right? So they're basically, they do all kinds of stuff. But when they started, they were in the manufacturing sector. And that was easier to do back in the day because costs were less. You could get people together and buy whatever machinery was left over after the war in order to be able to build out the factory. And now it's much harder. So if you have a business like this came across when we were talking to Isthmus, which is the one that's in Wisconsin, they were like, when we started this 30 years ago, the cost of initial capital was much lower than it is now relative to people's wealth. And so if you can't start a company from scratch, you cannot start an oil company from zero. But every single employee of that oil company, if they got together and organized, and I'm not even saying a union, but if they just came together as a strategic team that year after year after year was buying all of these shares, then they could end up taking over majority control of the board.
You could also imagine in the perfect state of the future that we've been imagining that would be subsidized to the workers to be able to do that.
It would be a relatively simple thing, but it would have to be you're in competition with people like BlackRock. Which
now
I think,
you are, right? Yeah, of course, this is in the ideal future where BlackRock doesn't have the supreme power that it has right now.
Yeah. But I think it's been a good conversation. I think we can probably wrap it here and try to solve the ills of the world next time.
Any final words of wisdom, Mr. Dudley?
Well, it's been a pleasure.
It's been a hell of a week, dude.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming out.
It's been a fantastic week. I only got to my top one about Oregon, which is right turn lanes, but I guess we'll save that for my next visit.
How many do you have on your top list?
I don't know.
Usually people don't start with the top one. Usually it's a countdown.
I guess there's a countdown. Yeah, right turn lanes. Awesome. Yeah, Oregonians are very friendly people.
But they don't want to be friends.
But they're, what's that?
They don't want to be friends.
But they don't want to be friends. They're very friendly, but they don't want to be friends.
So true. And, they've all been here since the Oregon Trail, and they're just like, yeah, we got everything covered. We don't need you in our crew.
Yeah, and it's beautiful out here. Definitely. It's beautiful country lands. So
well, I hope you will visit more often.
I think the top thing about Oregon is that they have you guys here. There, that's how we end this.
That's it.
Excellent.
It's a little flattery. Never hurt.